a lot of you know me, I'm Jim. As I present this information, I'm going to use kind of an adult learning model style instead of just hit you up with a bunch of PowerPoints. The PowerPoint's mostly to keep me on track. And in the adult learning model, it's about sharing experiences. And so just by a quick show of hands, who in here knows somebody who has died of suicide or maybe attempted suicide, okay? So more than half, which shows that there's a lot of experience in this room regarding suicide, all right? So that's important. Bottom line up front, executive summary. If you're going to take away anything from today's speech, it's this: nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that was a quote from President Theodore Roosevelt. What does he know about public administration? I don't know, right? So if it was important to him, if he thought it was important, and we know of his success, I think it's important today just as much. So I'm going to start off with one of the most a big story from my history of helping people at suicide. And it takes place in Germany. I was at the chapel, and I was just getting the chapel ready on a Thursday for that coming weekend service when the chaplain came up to me and he handed me a scrap of paper. And it had one person's name on it. And for sake of argument, we'll just say today it said Josh Doe. And he said, "Sergeant Giles, I need you to bring this person to my office." And I said, "Roger, sir." Because in the way he said it, I pretty much knew what he was asking. I pretty much knew the situation. I took the piece of paper, and this was about 5:30 on a Thursday evening, so everybody had kind of gone home for the day. But I was hoping that my human resource people, the S1, were still in their office. I went in there. I knew my lieutenant from the S1 by name, and I said, "Hey, can you help me out? I'm looking for this soldier." By the way, in my organization, there were over 5,000 people. So I'm trying to find one person who I've never met out of 5,000 at the end of the workday. Well, she's like, "Well, let me see." She types in his name, and we had 3 people by that name in our organization. I'm saying, "Well, I'm pretty sure it's the guy who just got here 4 months ago." So narrowed him down. She said, "He's in Alpha Company in 4th Squadron." So I go to 4th Squadron CQ, which is the 24-hour people on duty. And I say, "Hey, I'm looking for Alpha Company. Are they still at work?" "Nope, they've all gone home for the day." That particular group of men or that particular unit lives in this building. So I go over to that building and I talk to the people who are, we call them CQs. They're the people who run the building. I said, "Hey, I'm looking for this person." They're like, "Well, our records are old, but he should be in such and such a room." So I go to that room and I'm knocking on the door. Nothing, right? Now there's a general unspoken rule that in the military, if someone knocks on your door after work hours, you don't open the door because they want you to come back to work. But I'm really passionate about this, and I wasn't told what the situation was, but I could assume that this guy was in trouble. So I start knocking on all the doors in the building, and finally somebody opens the door, and I said, "Hey, I'm looking for, Josh Doe. Do you know where he is?" He's like, "Well, he used to live in that room, but I think he moved down to that room." I'm like, "All right." Having already knocked on both of those doors, I went back to both of those doors, and I just kept on knocking. It was after 15 minutes of just like pounding the heck out of these doors, I was really discouraged, and I was just about to leave, and I'm like, "You know what? I'm going to stay here until somebody opens this darn door." And I'm pounding, and finally, after 5 more minutes of pounding, somebody opens the door. At that moment, I could have been in a rage. "Why the heck didn't you open this door when I knocked the first time?" But no, I was like calm, cool, collected, keeping my compassion. I'm like, "Hey, hi, I'm Sergeant Giles. I'm looking for Josh. Is Josh in here?" And they're like, yeah, he's in here. And there were 2 other guys with him, and I go in and I see Josh, and he's got a cast on his leg, and I'm like, "Hey, Josh, I'm here on behalf of, Lieutenant Colonel so-and-so, the chaplain, and, I'm going to bring you over to see him, all right?" So I'm not asking, I'm kind of telling, but it's okay, I'll give you a ride. We'll head over there. He's a great guy. So Josh comes with me. We go back to the chapel. I link him up with the chaplain, and then stick around while they're doing their thing, while they're talking, about 40 minutes. And then at the end, he comes out, and, he's, had his little talk, and it seems like things are going to be okay. And he's like, "Hey, can I just have a cigarette before we go?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Let's go to the gazebo, talk things out." As we're talking, an MP drives up to the chapel. And this is an aerial view. So we're here in the gazebo. He's having a smoke. MP comes up, and I hear over his radio, yeah, we're looking for Sergeant Gould. And I'm like, oh. It's like, hey, I'm probably that Sergeant Gould you're looking for. And the guy's like, no, let me just go check. So he goes in to do a check in the building. And then I hear a siren in the background. And it's getting closer, and it's getting closer. I'm like, I wonder if that's for me, you know? And then it seemed like all at once, within 10 seconds, we had 2 ambulances pulled up in here. There was a fire truck that came around here, 2 more MPs, and a life flight helicopter lands right here in the chapel. And I'm telling you, I didn't think a helicopter could get in there. I know it might look big on the surface, but this is not like flat, even land, right? All these resources come pouring in. Not only we have the helicopter, 2 ambulances, the MPs, the fire truck, and the guy's first sergeant shows up, his sergeant major shows up, his bosses among bosses, and I was just like, wow. And you know, the poor kid, he's just like, man, I'm in so much trouble. But you know, I'm like, no, you're not. You know, all these resources are here for you because they care about you. And I tell that story to start off to show that in that situation, just one, you know, low guy on the totem pole, his life was, you know, is so valuable that they were willing to send all those resources. I've never seen a helicopter come in and land like right there so close. So I'm going to tell that to start off. So looking at the statistics and the numbers, Martha had said, you know, it costs the United States about $51 billion annually to, you know, because of those suicides and the aftermaths. And that's a significant, you know, amount of money. Here you have some other numbers thrown up there. The 10th leading cause of death in the U.S., but we're going to take a closer look at those numbers. And so another funny story is I just came from the Chaplain Center and School where my students used to come in, and they'd always raise their hand, and they'd be like, what's it like going down range? You know, they were so afraid of, you know, the enemy attacking ISIS and all those people. And I said, you know what? As bad as you might think it is downrange, the real danger is suicide. You know, if you're going to expire downrange, if you're going to die, it's going to be more likely because of suicide than because of battle-related injuries. So I wanted to, you know, demonstrate the seriousness of, you know, how bad suicide can be, that it should be at the forefront of everybody's mind. It's a real danger. Now, when we look closer at some numbers, right, ages 15 to 34, this is your second most likely way of dying, right? Ages 15 to 34. And I think if you think about your organization that you work for, how old are the people that work for you? You know, I'm fairly certain they're going to fall right in that range. And it's their second leading cause, right? So the number one is this unintentional injury, right? Accidents. Whoops, accidents. But I would ask that you all read between those lines. We've all seen in the news lately of this opioid epidemic, right? And I would argue that a lot of the deaths we see in the magnitude, I think I heard 140 some a day that we are losing. I think those people who are using those drugs, I think they have some of the same issues that we'll later talk about as people at suicide. And it wouldn't surprise me if we could attribute some of those opioid deaths to suicide. Additionally, car accidents. I'll tell you a little bit of story. When I was 8 years old, I woke up and I heard my mother crying. And I went to the kitchen and she was there crying with my grandmother. And she said that your father had been killed. Your dad died in a car accident tonight. And, you know, a little boy, 8 years old, I was devastated. You know, I went back to sleep. You know, and years later, I really thought about it. And I'm telling you now, my father didn't die in a car accident. My father died of suicide. He used the car and made an accident to make it look like an accident instead of suicide. And, you know, as a result, we received life insurance money and all that stuff. My wife had a friend who attempted suicide with a car while her husband was deployed downrange. So I just ask you to read between the lines of these numbers. I think they're higher than that. And as mentioned before, for every one suicide, there's 25 more attempted. All right? And I think the statistic stands about a fifth of the population suffers from mental illness. All right? So again, let's talk about how this, I'm sorry, everybody is at risk. Another story. My HHC commander when I was downrange, best company commander I ever had. If you ask Sergeant Gould today, hey, who do you want to be your company commander? This is the guy I would want, right? It took care of soldiers, always squared away, but we were downrange, and one day the first sergeant walks in and he had his loaded 9mm pistol in his mouth, all right? So I say that to say everybody can be at risk, okay? And you don't know what it's like until you're in that situation. And for people who are thinking of suicide, sometimes they're not thinking specifically, oh, I want to kill myself. I want to, end my life. What's happening is they're very alone. And all they can see is just this black darkness in their life. And they can't focus on anything else. All they see is this hurt and this pain and whatever it is, and they can't seem to focus on anything else, and they want that pain to stop. So a lot of times when people commit suicide, it's not because they want to die, it's because they want the pain to stop. And I hope that you all would kind of understand that and see that when you talk to people. Another thing about suicide is, physical versus mental injury, right? When we see people hurt, we naturally run to them and try and help them, right? When downrange, IED explosion, what do? We run to that vehicle and we pull those people out. It's just a natural instinct that everybody will do. But for some reason, we don't look at mental illness the same way. We don't see someone sitting over there alone, exhibiting signs and symptoms, and try to rush in and help them. We kind of just say, that's not my problem, But we need to look at it as kind of the same thing. I think if we took the same view of the mental illness and thoughts of suicide as someone who is physically injured and in danger, we would be able to help people a lot more, okay? And signs of suicide, right? I hear a lot of people say, well, there were just no signs. They just out of nowhere. The recent shooting in Las Vegas. I'm sorry, but buying, many assault rifles might be a sign, okay? In 2009, it was January 5th, I got a phone call, and it was my aunt. And she said, Jim, your cousin David is dead. And I said, what? And she's like, yes. I don't know if it was an accident or what, but his handgun went off, and he's dead. And I'm like, man, I just don't get it. I was just home for Christmas. And I'm telling you, I didn't think there was any signs of suicide. This guy, single guy, had a job, had a great apartment. We went out to the bar, had some drinks. Things were great. Now, it was in 2009 that I became a chaplain assistant, and I learned about signs and symptoms of suicide. And when I think back, I was like, you know what? All the signs were there. He had relationship difficulty. He started taking that medication that, side effects are suicide. He was drinking and using some drugs. So there were signs there. It's just that I didn't link them to the possibility of suicide. And I was just asked that you all kind of do the same. Number one reason for suicide is relationship difficulty, right? People who feel that they've lost that connection to people or that connection's in danger. So divorce, even a dog dying, family problems. That's what really, if you need to listen for those things or see them in people's lives to kind of pinpoint what's going on, all right? All right, so I'm going to try and pull this all together like why us, right? So we've all heard of, Jim Collins, good to great, getting the right people on the bus. But I would argue that in public organizations, how it kind of works is the bus pulls up and you kind of step on as the leader. And the people that are on the bus are kind of the people who you got, right? And so it's great to think that we can get the right people on the bus, but I argue in public organizations, you have to do a lot with what you're given. Because as a public organization opposed to private, sometimes it's hard just to keep those people on the bus and not leaving you to go to another bus. And you need to get, your mission done, all right? So 7 habits of highly effective people. One great thing about that good leaders do is they're able to shift their paradigm. They're able to shift the way they view things. So, Ryan, can you come up for a second? Just want to have a quick exercise. Stand right here for me. I'm going to ask you, what number do you see? 6. A 6. Well, I see a 9. Okay? Thanks. Have a seat. Right? He sees a 6. I see a 9. Right? But we're both looking at the exact same thing. Who's right? Am I right because I outrank him? And I'm telling you, that's a 9. No, not necessarily. So being the type of leader who can shift your paradigm, shift your perceptions, and see things from your subordinate's point of view is going to go a long way. Again, people don't know People don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care, right? Top 10 mistakes leaders make, all right? They point out about servant-based leadership. Servant leadership, right? A lot of leaders today think that the organization leadership pyramid works like this. You're at the CEO, you're at the top, and you lead all these people, and they do what you say. Well, in fact, it's actually the opposite. It's an inverted pyramid, right? You're put in that leadership position so that you can help those beneath you do their jobs better. Like, your job is to kind of help them do their job great. Because they're not going to do their job and support you unless they know that you're going to be helping them. Does that make sense? It's kind of one of those help me, help you sort of thing. So I want y'all to keep that in mind, servant-based leadership. And again, as the new generations come into public organizations, we kind of have to be more responsive to what the public, the way they see good leadership, all right? And it's all about building trust, right? 5 dysfunctions of a team. The cornerstone as a leader or as a manager of everything is trust. If your subordinates don't trust you, then, not only will they not do what you say or care what you know, they might even go so far as to subvert your activities, right? Sabotage. And then once you get to know them, emotional IQ. Maxwell, if there's one thing I've learned here since we've been going to school is, what do they keep talking about? The people, right? Conflict resolution. How do you resolve this conflict between people? It's all about the people skills. And I would argue that suicide is just another example of conflict, except it's internal conflict within that person. Because if you think about somebody and all they can see is that horrible, death and the pain, it's going to affect the way they work. And so by being that leader that reaches out to them, gets to know them, makes that connection, you're going to improve, their work and the environment that everybody works. It's going to show that, you're a good leader. And then, we've heard about, if you don't spend at least half your time on the people, then they're going to make you spend more than enough time. In the Army, we like to say 90% of your time will be consumed by 10% of your personnel, right? And I think a lot of us have seen that in our public organizations, where you have these 1 or 2 problem people and they're costing you all this time. But again, my speech today is about, instead of trying to kick those people off the bus, if you come into your organization and you show some compassion and you touch base with each and every person and get to know them, get to know their story, then they will bend over backwards to come and complete your mission, right? So now, it's been easy for me to do it in the military because I live by a creed, the NCO creed. And part of that creed is, I will know my soldiers and always place their needs above my own. And so as an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, for those of you not familiar, part of my job has been to take care of my subordinates. It's been a bit of that servant-based leadership. Well, what issues are you having in your personal life? And then using my authority and my power to help them with their issues, all right? And then furthermore, I'll be loyal to those with whom I serve, right? When I step on the bus, that's my team, and that's who I'm going to have to be loyal to. And I will earn their respect and confidence, which I call trust. It's all about building that trust. And you're not going to build it if people don't think that you care about them. All right. So one of my favorite movies, Christmas, help me out here, drawing a blank. It's a Wonderful Life, right? So who has not seen this movie? Anybody not seen it? Oh, you haven't seen it? Well, I'll bring it in for you. So George Bailey, right? He's the great guy in the town that everybody knows. He sends his love on everybody. He knows everybody. He helps them. He does everything he can to bend over backwards to help them. And then something happens to where he's considering suicide, right? All he can see is this horrible darkness, and he can't see any way out. And then, so he's thinking about suicide. And does anybody remember how the angel saves him? He jumps in the water, right? So the angel jumps in the water, and then, like, he's committing suicide, and then George sees it, and he has such a big heart. What does he do? He instantly jumps in the water to save that person, right? It's not because he wants to die. It's because he wants his pain to go away that he's on that bridge. And that was a good example of how he was able to be helped by this other person. And then you see at the end of the movie, because George Bailey was such a great guy and so caring, everybody came and they all chipped in and helped him out with his problem. And I would say that it's a bit the same in your public organization. If you come in there and you treat people with dignity and respect and you genuinely care about them, show them compassion, it's like you're building a family, all right? And then whatever comes down, whatever gets handed to you, whatever problem, whatever issue, you're going to be able to turn to your family, at the work in your public organization, and they're going to have no problem helping you out and solving whatever it is, all right? And then the final slide, it's all about perspective, right? So here's us right now. We're sitting right here in Maxwell, which is sitting on the Syracuse campus, in Syracuse, in New York, in the United States, all on this planet, right? What are the chances that any two human beings on Earth end up in the same room together, right? Slim to none. And life is short. Life's too short to be a dictator, right? We're here for a very short period of time, and I guarantee you that when you leave whatever organization you work for, what remains isn't going to be all the great work that you've done, all the changes you made, but what remains is going to be your reputation and how you treated those people. And I would just submit to you that showing compassion in the workplace and keeping suicide at the front of your mind is going to make you a much better public administrator, much better public leader. So at this time, I would like to open up for questions. Starting with, did we have anybody online?
There is a question.
Okay, great.
The question is, does revealing somebody's potential for suicide exacerbate, make it worse, or?
Absolutely not. And I would say this, look at the alternative. If they keep it to themselves, the alternative might be death, right? Or a path to suicide. Whereas I truly believe it's a sign of strength to come up and say that, hey, I need this help. And a lot of people think that help looks like what I described earlier, where the helicopters and the fire engine and everybody's going to be coming in. But help is as simple as just sitting down and talking to somebody, showing you care, and establishing a relationship. That's all it has to be. It doesn't have to be strap them down on a gurney and take them off and put them in a straitjacket, all right? Get those ideas out of your head. That's not what it's like. People who are at risk of suicide are just going through a tough time. They need somebody to talk to. A problem shared is a problem halved. I don't know if you guys heard that. So if I share my problem with Mike, then that's one more person to bear my problem. So it makes that problem half the weight, right? So thank you for that question. Any other questions? Yes, Sean.
You talked about servant-based leadership, which is something that I definitely agree with and have tried to focus on in my own career. But at times there's instances where it doesn't come natural, so compassion may not come natural for some individuals in leadership. What's the best way for individuals in that situation to exercise that compassion muscle? What's some things that they could do?
So great question. I struggled myself with the compassionate leadership. I think DC peers might hate me for this, but the reflective listening, right? Learning to listen to somebody. I'll tell you what, my life changed when I read that book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and I learned that people think differently. And it goes back to, seeing it both ways. And I think the hardest part for people who are not natural servant-based leaders is this piece right here. They can't put themselves in the shoes of the other person. And so the more that you can see it from someone else's point of view, I think is what helps that servant-based leadership. And I'll tell another story to go along with that. Someone I just recently served with, she was not a servant-based leader. She came in, she was a 300 PT test, she was gung-ho, she knew her stuff, and she expected that from all her subordinates, and she would just hammer them. And one of her subordinates just wasn't making it. Wasn't good at PT, was having problems. And then it turned out that soldier had cancer. And then she watched over the next, fairly quickly, I think it was about 16 weeks, 4 months, her subordinate die of cancer. And she felt so terrible for the way that she treated that individual. And then on top of that, then she got pregnant. And with her first child, diminished her physical capability, took her out of the workplace, took away her expertise, and then she found herself in the exact same kind of predicament as that soldier. So if she had had the foresight to see things from the subordinate's point of view, have the paradigm shift, be able to see that, I think that is what helps the most with servant-based leadership. Thank you for that question, Sean. Anybody else? Yes.
Our reaction to situation is that's the challenge actually.
Yes.
That's like somebody dies in the family. We don't know what to say, or we end up saying the wrong thing. So when we know that somebody is going through this type of problem, these suicidal tendencies, what are the things we shouldn't say or we shouldn't do?
I won't.
Is there something?
That's a good. So here's the thing. Try to be understanding. Adopt the servant-based leadership. Understand that person is going through something that maybe you can't understand. And instead of focusing on what not to say, I would focus on what you should say, or what you should convey is that they're not alone. Because remember, relationship difficulty is the number one reason why people take their lives. They feel alone, they feel like nobody cares about them. So just show them as much as you can that you care, that you want to get them to help, that they're worth it, Again, my first story, no expense was spared to save that one life. And I think a lot of people, when they get in that place that they can't see past, they feel like their life is not worth it. So if you can convey to them that, their life is worth it, that there's all these people around them, even in the workplace. That's why it's important to make the workplace kind of, the servant-based, family-centered, everybody knows each other. So I would focus on those things. I don't think there's really a wrong thing to say other than, if you were callous or uncaring or cut them out. The wrong thing would be to do nothing. Does that make sense? Yes, thank you. Yes, Jeremiah.
Well, some of the questions that have come up is there any training that you recommend people to take or?
Well, thank you, Jeremiah.
To learn about?
One of the trainings I've been in is comes from Assisted Living. They're a Canada-based company, and so I'm what's considered a master trainer. And there's a whole process. And they call it the path to assisted living. And there's a whole bunch of steps, just what you said, to sit down and talk to somebody and get them to the proper resources. And that's why I say, it's more about letting them know that there's a connection and getting them to more help. But Living Works and the Assist is the name of the program. And so if you're in your organization and you can have some Assist trainers come out from Living Works, that would be some great training. Thank you. Any more questions? Well, thank you so much. You've been a fantastic audience.